welcome everyone. My name is Bernadett Halaj. As I said it, I am an accredited trauma-informed coach practitioner. I am based in the UK, in Suffolk. So I saw some of you are from Suffolk as well. I planned this lecture. I try to approach it from numerous angles because it's neuroscience, right? So I'm going to introduce what I am doing a little bit, and then my trauma information interest and qualification come from. So I studied with NMS, with the NLP-related modalities, and I studied with the Mind Science Institute with Dr. Siegel, and I'm certified from that institute. I've worked with, previously I've worked with in SCN settings, in trauma-informed SCN settings, with young offenders, and then currently I am expanding my work now, and I'm working with individuals on death row in the United States. So that's where my trauma information comes from. That's the depth, the level of depth where I go into trauma, and I try to resolve trauma points, trauma narratives, and most importantly, how the body reacts to those narratives and emotions. So that's me, really. I am mixing neurobiology. I'm not just neurobiologist here in a sense, because I studied and practiced kinesiology. I also practiced psychodrama. So I am mixing the methods and elements in my practice. But my key focus is on somatic experiencing on the body. Because when emotions rises, is also body-based. It's not just cognitive. So we need to understand that. So a little bit, I'm going to explain how the brain functions. I don't want to go into much details about that, but I think the part where emotions arises, when narrative arises, is quite important. I'm going to introduce you to 4 different exercises. I will ask you to be in a seated position if you can. I'm in a standing position, and I will stay in a standing position. But if you can, please sit down when we practice those exercises. They are very simple, and then you can implement them into your own practices. Right, so let's start then. I will share my PowerPoint. And hopefully it will work. Can we all see this?
Yes.
Yes, we can all see it. Excellent. All right. So that's me, and that's my business motto: lead life luminously, and that's my website. So let's move on. Right. So this is Dan Siegel: where attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows. I've chosen this quote reference from him because that's a key part when it comes to the body. We believe it's only the brain who creates narratives. That is not true. It's the whole body now communicating through neural firings and neuron cells. Neuroscience was revolutionized, I like to say this, by the brain scan and again body scan. So since we know and see more of the brain and how the neuron cells are actually functioning and doing things, now we can say that confidently, okay, it's not stored in any parts. It's all over the place going on as the attention goes. And I will explain how this attention goes a little bit later. But if you could write this down, because this actually is quite an important quote, so you can understand when it goes into narrative, right? It's a lot take place, and the body is involved with that. So we need to understand how the somatic experiencing is so important when it comes to exploring narratives with a client. Right. So then this is what I'm going to talk about. 3 strategies: the body utilizing interpersonal neurobiology, somatic experiencing, and then thoughts and emotions. And in my practice, this is the order. I am looking at for how, for example, clients hold their hands or what they do with their hands. Sometimes I don't see their hands, but I can tell the table is moving, for example, because of restless leg syndrome. And if you can look at for signs like that, right, there is a narrative going behind already, as the body is obviously going into often its default mechanism. It's often they do things. Like on death row, offenders would share what actually they do when certain narrative comes on. And it is often involves the limbs. When they have to hit something or they have to do something with their legs, like kick or run. That obviously explains, right? The body is involved in the narrative and emotions. Right, so that's our plan. So hopefully it's all good so far. Now I like to say a disclaimer here quickly. I know non-medicalized approaches I will introduce. However, in my practice, I often came across with individuals who are actually on medication or they have conditions. So if that is the case, then obviously I need to have this from a legal point of view as well. So if that's the case for you, then obviously please apply it. And but otherwise, hopefully what you learn here today is going to empower you to the level then you can start to reduce taking medication, if that is the case, or turning to your doctor, because you will be able to regulate and integrate those brain modes, because neuroscience moves away from the word part, modes, and again, connecting the nervous systems, right, with the brain systems. And again, that's what I'm going to explain next. So firstly, what is trauma? Now, when you hear the word trauma, what comes up? So if you could put this in a chat, and then if you could call them out maybe, because I don't see the chat. But what comes up as you hear the word trauma?
Someone saying flashback,
Mm-hmm.
crisis, wound, distress, deep shock, an event, a life-changing event. Childhood, it's the wound left after a stressful event, distressing past events that live on in the body. The effect of a disturbing experience, something that takes you back to something that happened in the past. Pain, a life-changing event, an experience that caused considerable upset. Something the brain struggles to process, a result of a harmful experience. Emotional pain, an event the mind can't cope with. Brokenness. Unresolved emotional wounding, unresolved issues. Damage that will always be stored in the brain and difficult to recover from on your own. Habits, stuckness, dysregulation.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Yes, these is all of them, right, together. Now let me show you, this is in a simple way, what trauma is, because often we associate trauma with life events, right? With something really deep, negative happened, right, to us. And then we'll explain it's actually not the happening that we should put the emphasis on. So trauma is a disruption to the nervous system, which disconnects the nervous systems from the brain systems. That's what it is. Many of us experience trauma. That is not something like it only happens to, let's say, soldiers in the war, but it only happens to people who suffered a type of assault or abuse or neglect. It happens to almost all of us, right? So the types of trauma, what we need to consider here, it can be generational, can be developmental, biological, even financial. People would not think about financial trauma, but there is financial trauma too. Like how certain things, the narratives, right, the certain behavioral patterns, right? They came with when it came to finances. It's financial trauma, educational trauma. What happened, for example, in the education setting or in the education setting, what kind of narrative and therefore view were reinforced. So there's so many types of trauma we can consider. It can be big and it can be small because you don't experience trauma in the same way. So sometimes you don't think about a loud noise, for example, when I worked with in an SEN setting with young people with moderate learning difficulties. One of them were traumatized because of loud noise. It's not necessarily people are involved with it, right? It's actually happened because of the train, and that was enough. And then that caused the disconnection between the brain systems and the nervous systems. So it's just an example. But if you think about trauma, we need to be a bit more realistic about that's what trauma is. Many types, well, I listed up some of them, like biological is inheritable. You can inherit trauma. Again, developmental, right? What happens the first 3 years? Psychology often puts an emphasis on, like the first 3 years is so important when it comes to child development. And in that 3 years, trauma can happen. And again, I a little bit I will touch base the attachment styles. But let's move on from here. So I like to introduce you to a hand model. So hopefully you see my hand here. So let's imagine this is a spinal cord, my wrist. And the palm is the brainstem. And the thumb is the limbic area. And my fingers are the cortex. And that's the brain. And the connectome, the whole thing together, is the neural connection, right, of the brain. Now, if trauma happens, the impairment will happen. The disconnection will happen. Again, it can be explained to a client if they are interested in it. It's just a couple of minutes, really. But I'm explaining it to you, what is responsible for what. So again, spinal cord here, we got the nervous system. We got the palm here with the brainstem, then is responsible, for example, sleep, breathing, and fear. They tend to call it responses, but if it goes to reaction, it becomes reactive, and it makes the nervous system reactive. It's actually not responsive then, it's reactive. And when it comes to fear reactions, we consider 5 of them and not 3. So I will list up the 5, but I will actually say it now. You might want to take a note of them. So the fear reactions or responses are fight, fly, freeze, faint, and fawn. The fawning one is pleasing people. And often we don't think about, but pleasing people surely is not trauma related. It is. Because every time something happens, right, the narrative comes up with that emotion, and then the behavioral pattern, right, gets repeated. Because trauma is also, can be, again, not for everyone, but accumulative. Is repeated. So that is why we call it pattern, because it's already in a mechanism. So that's the 5, right? So that's in a brainstem. Now the limbic area is actually have 5 functions. So this is where we have emotions. This is where we have motivation. This is where we have evaluation, attachment, and memory. And memory implicit, we don't need to remember, right, how to ride a bike, for example, and explicit, right? Right now, I have to tap into my explicit memory because I have to remember as explaining these things to you, right? So these are the 5 functions. And then the cortex, right? Then is responsible for reward circuits. Often it is called, actually, it's quite an interesting fact about the dopamine, because this area here is novelty. So dopamine, again, if you think about today's world, how many of us running on dopamine because of online? And online, unfortunately, triggers that, prompts that. So that is when we believe we already creating something new information coming in. We are trying new things out. And if you think about younger people who are online most of the time, this is actually gets exhausted, right? Instead of trying out new things in actual physical reality, they are doing it online. So yeah, they are running high on dopamine. So I thought I'd just mention that as well. So these are the things that can be explained to a client if they want to understand how the brain works. Now, obviously, when trauma happens, then the disconnection happens. This here, the cortex, gets impaired. And this is important because then what happens? This regulation happens and disintegration happens. So to be able to help the client to now obviously repair that in a sense or restore it, we need to teach them techniques so they can integrate the systems, the impaired systems. Because without techniques, it's not going to happen. So I'm going to teach some of them. So far, I think we're good. This is just an extra. I thought I hand model the brain. Hopefully it helped, right? But let's move on. I actually created that saying. I am very proud of that. So the amygdala, right? The lizard brain, billions of years old. I must mention the amygdala separately here because it's responsible for the fear reactions. So don't let your lizard brain take your breath away. What does this mean? It means when the disconnection happens between the brain systems and the nervous systems, the first thing what we don't do correctly is breathing. We stop breathing correctly. Now, obviously, in every individual is going to play out differently, right? Like sleep apnea, I used to teach psychology, so sleep apnea is quite, again, it goes back to, right, it's already created a default mechanism. It's not breathing correctly because it's taking more air in through the mouth. It's forgetting to take air in through the nostrils. So that's quite interesting. And again, there are breathing exercises. It can be corrected with breathing exercises. It involves hands, because then we need to teach the individual to teach the brain again. This here is not blocked. This here is not like don't exist. It does exist. And then you need to send signals. So again, it gets activated. So again, it's just an extra information there. So when you reflect on the narrative, how does that show up? So it's just a coaching question. I thought I put it here. When the client shares something with you, there's a narrative. You can watch out, obviously, for the body language because body language is language. And then maybe ask, and how does this show up in your body? What happens then? And in my practice, in my experience, they will share, I can't breathe properly, I get stiff, I can't move. Or I can actually move, but I feel like there is a block here in my throat, I can't breathe properly. Now for that, you can teach breathing exercises. You can actually have the client to breathe properly, right? So start to connect the nervous systems to the brain systems because they are in disconnection. In another word, the body is now dysregulating and doesn't know what to do with itself. Sometimes I use an English, it's quite a good phrase, right? The headless chicken, because it's something like that, right? Doesn't mean we lose our heads. We don't lose our head, but it's a little bit like that. Because the brain is now not sure about what is going on other than is now sending a signal through your spinal cord, right? Through your vagus nervous system. Okay, we need cortisol here. We need more cortisol from the adrenaline glands, which is top of the kidneys, because something is wrong here. And that's when we're going to end up with more cortisol in our bloodstream. And sometimes we don't need that level of cortisol because we are not in that situation. We don't need to fight and fly and faint and freeze and foam with anyone. But the narrative is already there. And again, I'm going to talk about how the brain actually doesn't know about time because it's doing something completely different. So that's what's happening. And when it happens, the disconnection happens, the brain actually goes into either rigidity or chaos. In the middle, we got window of tolerance. In window of tolerance, this is where we have awareness, flexibility, adaptability. we have energy, we have vitality. When the brain is disconnecting from the nervous systems, then that's when it starts to close, because it's now rigidity and chaos. And then if it loses window of tolerance, then violent communication will show up. Non-verbal or verbal violent communication. So again, when we teach offenders, we teach them, you need to stay in a window tolerance. We need this openness, we need the flexibility. So let's work on it. And obviously there are techniques, and then we can help them to stay in window of tolerance. So there is openness and not closeness, because the brain is now rigid or chaotic and doesn't know what to do because it's high on cortisol, because it wants to do the 5 now, right? Remember amygdala. So this is very important, not to let our amygdala to take our breath away. So what I'm going to do next, that is a quote from Gabor Mate. I did some workshops. There's a Facebook platform of his where sometimes I help individuals who are sharing their traumatic experiences with therapists and coaches, and then in writing you can actually help them. It doesn't need to be in person and in actual verbal communication. You can have someone in writing, like I do on death row. I'm not talking to them, I am writing to them, and it does work. So trauma is not about what happened to you. It is about what happened after as a result of what happened to you. So in another word, what happened to your nervous system? What happened to the brain systems? So that's disconnection. That's what happened. And now to that, it forms a narrative. And in that narrative, there will be a view of the self, which then on the next slides, I will talk about what does that mean, view of the self, right? But in here, I like you to, if you can, because I'm going to now demonstrate 2 very important breathing exercises. You can apply it on yourself, and then you can apply it, obviously you can teach it to your clients, and they are very safe. But the first time we do this, I ask you to be in a seated position. Later, obviously, you can do it in walking, even running if you feel more confident with it. But right now, if you could just stay in a seated position. So self-regulative and integrative exercises. So the first one is when somebody actually can move the limbs, move the hands, right? But thinks I can't breathe correctly. There's a block in my throat right now, or I feel sweaty, or I feel, again, that narrative, and the brain is now going rigid and chaos, and I don't know what is going on. I feel nervous, I feel stressed, distressed, I can't cope with it, right? So for that, you can ask the client to take a big breath through the nostrils, right? So you now can breathe through the nostrils, big breath, and then you hold it about 4 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you exhale through your mouth. So let's do this now together, right? So you take a big breath through your nostrils, and then you hold it for 4 seconds. So I am counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and on 5 exhales through your mouth. Right. So if you did that, we're going to now extend this breathing exercise. And what I ask you, find your dominant hand, right? In my case, is the right hand. And then place it top of your chest, like the heart area. And put it on your chest, right? So with this now, we're going to teach the brain, we don't need cortisol. The amygdala is not needed. We are not in a fight, flight, faint, freeze, fawn situation. Nobody's chasing us. There is no real physical danger, right? So top of your dominant hand. Dominant hand is important here because it has more muscle mass, right? Because you use it more. So now the brain thinks, okay, there is a pressure on the chest. It potentially can be dangerous, right? If it carries on, right? And then I would need to make the body to fight, because we need to obviously escape from it. But it's not that type. It's just a light, gentle pressure on the chest. And now start to practice, right? So you take a big breath through your nostrils, and then count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then exhale through your mouth. So one more time. Take a big breath through your nostrils and then hold it for 1, 2, 3, 4, and then exhale through your mouth. And then you should be able to feel more relaxed now. If you were stressed, right, then you should be able to do that. So next time you feel like you are anxious, you are stressed, then you can practice this breathing exercise. So what happens, because of the slight pressure on the chest, actually is now increasing more oxytocin and obviously launching it into your bloodstream. The amygdala is now learning, okay, there is more oxygen in the brain. I'm getting it through obviously the bloodstream in the veins. Okay, that's not that situation. I am learning it now. Okay, we don't need cortisol. So to be able to reduce cortisol, then obviously we need to tap into oxytocin. And the breathing and the hand move together can create more oxytocin, increase it and release it into your bloodstream. So it's quite a good exercise to calm anyone down, really, but they need to be able to use the limbs. Now, what happens when they can't use the limbs because they are in a freeze state? In a freeze state, you cannot ask anyone to now put the dominant hand top of the chest. It's not going to happen. So in that case, then, you will teach the client, you will teach yourself to find a rectangle shape around you. In our world, luckily, there are rectangle shapes all around us, right? The wardrobe shape is rectangle. The window frame is rectangle. The door frame is rectangle. Anywhere else I look in my own environment right now is rectangle everywhere around me, right? So with your eyes, find a corner, any corner, because we're going to now use the eye movement reprocessing, because the eye will help us now to actually get back to normalcy and breathe normally. So first, when the client can't breathe properly or yourself can't breathe correctly, then just find a corner and with your eyes, follow the shape of the rectangle shape, right? With your eyes, you just do that. So I got a window in front of me, so that's what I'm doing. I'm just doing that. I'm following that shape. And then eventually you will be able to start to breathe in and out, right, normally. Because what you do now, you are interrupting the narrative. Because the brain went into a certain narrative and it's believing, okay, so again, we need cortisol because this is what's going on. We are in danger again. But we are not in danger. The brain thinks it is. Later I will explain this, but right now, let's just practice this exercise. So then you're following the rectangle shape with your eyes, and then you're breathing normally, right? So through the nostrils in, and then through the mouth if you can out, and then that's it. And then eventually yourself or the individual will come out of freeze state. You don't need to do this for a very long time again, because this is a very, very useful exercise. So self-regulative and integrative exercises, I showed you too. If you could put it in a chat now, how you feel or what you think about the exercises, that would be great. And Izzy, if you could read it out loud.
I have actually just popped the chat on so that people can just directly, you'll be able to see. Is that okay, Bernadette? If not, we can go back to...
fine. I might don't see the slideshow, but yes.
Yeah. Just let me know if you can see it. If not, I can I can read them out. So yeah, if you want to read them out, or I can.
I can't see them yet. If you could.
No worries.
Yeah, I can't see them.
Said they felt their shoulders dropping, particularly with the first exercise. It was simple and absolutely made sense. Looks like this could help it with panic attacks.
Yeah, definitely.
Very calming. Incredibly useful. Very relaxing. I love how accessible it is. Easy to use, simple and immediate. Felt calm. Easy to do, very useful. The rectangle exercise seems to be really powerful. Second one is super great, very quick change. Love the simplicity, and I know it will be super useful. Love the eye movement exercise, instantly calming and soothing.
Thank you for sharing. Yes, excellent. These two exercises are life savings. They save lives. I saved lives with them. And I didn't even see the individuals. I was on the phone to them in pandemic when I volunteered in one of the UK-based charities. And the individual said, I'm on the carpet, I can't breathe. And just started to breathe for that individual. Just copy me. This is what I'm doing. And then eventually, as I was explaining what I was doing, then the individual started to doing the same thing, right? Finding that rectangle shape. But it was quite amazing, actually, how this whole picking up the phone came about as well. But that's another story for another time. Right, so let's move on from here. And then now I like to introduce here that Dr. Siga, you might have heard his name a bit more, especially because Animas is now obviously invited him as well. As I said, I directly studied with him at the Mind Science Institute. The other doctor here, Richard Schwarz, I didn't come across with him on any platform, but I did some workshops with him, and I definitely recommend his method. It's called IFS, Internal Family Systems, because when it comes to the narrative, it is a very helpful method, what he explains about. Kinesiology also taps into this. And again, if you studied coaching, then you know from NLP, the NLP modalities, when we're looking at metaphors, when we are making up that X, right, then it's something similar, but I think it makes more sense when there is a book called No Bad Parts, and Dick or Richard Schwarz, he wrote that. So let's just go to Dr. Siga first, and then I explain Dr. Schwarz again. So he talks about post-traumatic stress, but briefly we covered that, and talks about the trigger and stimuli, stressor, and rigidity and chaos. I explained that, and in-group and out-group. So what the brain does when it goes to rigidity and chaos, and also in-grouping and out-grouping, it often does that in a healthy way as well. If we enter, for example, a supermarket, the brain already scanned that environment for us. It's already played this in-grouping, out-grouping, whether we should belong to that environment or not, because it could be potentially dangerous for us. The word what we need to use here when it comes to trauma is unresolved. Something is unresolved in trauma. And very often, obviously, it's in the narrative that is unresolved. Now, when it comes to a stimuli or stressor, right, the brain actually, as I said, it does not know about time, because the brain goes through directional changes. And I will explain that again, but I think I mention it now so we understand the trigger, stimuli, stressor, because anything can be a reminder to the brain. Absolutely anything. It's a sense-making organ. So a picture on the wall can be a reminder of whatever narrative. A weather can be a reminder. An individual in front of us who don't even know can be a reminder. Anything can be a reminder, a stimulus or a stimuli in front of us. And that's when the brain taps into the narrative. Okay, I know this bit. I came across with this before, so let's just find out. And with that, the biochemistry will appear as well. Because if it's that type of narrative, then it will recreate the biochemistry. There will be cortisol again running in the bloodstream. Often unnecessary, but it's doing that because it believes we are back into that narrative. Now, in that narrative, as Dr. Schwarz talks about in his method, there will be sub-selves or sub-personalities, and they are part of the defensive mechanism or coping mechanism, because this is now repeated, this is accumulative, this is what the individual learned. This is how I can cope with this. Every time there is a reminder, we tap into that narrative, with the narrative, the sub-self comes up. And the sub-self is behaving in a way how in the original story had to behave, right? Because the original story, what happens then, it no longer belongs to the natural self. It no longer belongs to the authentic or true self or greater self. We now belong to a sub-self because the sub-self felt, as he spells them out, exiles, protectors, or caretakers, they believe they had to step up in that situation to save the body, to save the individual. So every time they are triggered, they will come on, okay, I'm in rescuing position, because the true self can't do that. because first time that happened to me, that also, that whatever happened, right? Verbal, non-verbal, violent communication, I had to came on. There's quite an interesting interview with a lady, I can't remember her name. She lives in Australia, and she recently won a court case, and her therapist allowed her to show up with her sub-personalities. And they counted more than 1,000 of sub-personalities, because obviously the atrocities, the adversary events what happened to her. So sometimes she was speaking not from herself, a named individual, right? But sometimes she actually said, this is a sub-personality now speaking at court, and this is the sub-personality's name. And she was allowed to do that. So then they could piece the jigsaws together and create what actually happened to her. So again, it's quite an interesting study, if you like, how these sub-personalities came about. The intensity is important, because how they intensify, right, in every individual is going to be different. The most of us, we're not aware of sub-personalities. We don't have multiple personality disorder. It used to be called like that. But we do disassociate. And when the dissociation happens, then the association happens somewhere else, right? And that's where the sub-personalities came on. So again, when I talk to offenders, often the first thing what we do, we make them up and then we name them. And kinesiology practice methods, they also do that. So we can work with them, we can teach them how to belong again, because eventually they will come and belong. At some point they will disappear. But if the unresolved trauma is unresolved, they will be there. They will hang around, and they will be in the sub-narratives. And when they are triggered, that's where the communication will happen. It won't happen from consciousness, it will happen from subconsciousness or even unconsciousness. Right, so let's move on from here. But if you have any question, then please put it to Izzy, and then at the end of the session, then we will talk about them. Right, so as I said, the brain is a sense-making organ. The mind is an emergent property of information and energy flow. So in other words, the two things are not the same. So the brain is making sense. Okay, there is a stimuli or stimulus in front of me, is a reminder, now I need to recreate that story, right? And the story will be recreated because now it believes we are back in that time. But again, the brain doesn't know that. It's going through directional changes, right? So in the directional change, okay, I right now, I remember this. And I remember what happened then, and then we needed to create this biochemistry. That biochemistry saved us, right? So in that biochemistry, we must have cortisol, because cortisol will save us, because cortisol will prepare the body for the fear reactions. But we are in a supermarket, right? It's not that story, it's not that narrative, but the brain doesn't know that, because the brain is already back in that past event, right? And if it steps into that past event, the communication will happen from there, and not from present, not from consciousness, not from awareness. It's not communicating from the past event because it's reliving it. And interestingly, the future then will be predicted from there and not from present. So again, you can teach yourself, the client, how to be a bit more aware of that, right? It's the past, and in the past, yes, you had to live what you had to live, but right now is not that time. So let's make a compromise with the sub-self or sub-personality. Let's practice the breathing exercise, one of them, right? And then when the body is calmer, when it's a bit more integrated and regulated and connected, then we can approach again, right? And then from present, try to then now predict the future, and not from that past event. Because from that past event, the future will be impaired in a sense, because it communicates from subconsciousness. So hopefully so far it's easy to follow, but you will tell me shortly. So that's quite important when it comes to the mind. The mind is not stored anywhere. The biochemistry is stored. the trauma is stored literally in the body because the body remembers. I didn't breathe correctly when that happened. Okay, we are back in that narrative, so I am doing it again. I am not breathing correctly because I remember that. I stored it, and I stored the biochemistry with it. So I know exactly how to create that chemical cocktail. I know exactly what we need because that saved us. So right now we are back in a past event. So again, I need to recreate that because that's going to save us too. And we are actually not there. So here you can learn new exercises. So if I just move on, what I like you to do, if you could answer these questions, because I know in psychology, especially positive psychology, they teach about the negative emotions. There are no negative emotions. Emotions are emotions, and then I will have a slide about that as well. So what we need to understand, there are negative views. There are negative views in the narratives, the negative views of the self. So when that happened, there was a situation, a relational situation, because the mind is relational. And I could not wrong the other, but something happened there. So somebody was in the wrong. Oh, that must have been I then. I was in the wrong. And it wrongs the self. And that's, again, Dr. Schwarz explains that how, again, these sub-perceptives and sub-characteristics come about. So based on the earlier concepts, the sense-making brain forms view, opinion, and belief about the self. I put John Bowlby here. If you studied psychology, then they are the founders of attachment styles and attachment theory. And then Mary Ainsworth, again, together, attachment theory. And if it comes to, for example, avoidant attachment style, that's exactly what happens at early stage or developmental stage in our lives when a child expects a caretaker, a guardian, obviously meet the needs or serve the need, and the need is not served, and eventually the child then learns, okay, if nobody serves my needs, then something is wrong. So who is wrong? I can't wrong my caretaker, but something is wrong because my needs are not served. Okay, so then it must be I am the wrong one. And then from that on, right, it creates narrative and it creates a view of the self. I must be undeserving. I must be not good enough. I must be not loved or not lovable. And then it can keep going, right? So what view it forms as it wrongs the self. So the exercise is, what is the view? And when I work individuals in my practice, I often raise questions about the view. So in this situation, scenario, what is the view of the self? What is it that you think about yourself in this scenario, in this relational situation? And then it's negative. I'm not deserving that. I can't do that. I'm incapable. But you can make it up, like it's so many. And then at the end, right, then you question it. And is that true? Is that true? You are not good enough. You are undeserving. You are incapable. You are not lovable, etc., etc. Because the answer is no, it's not true. It is true you are lovable. It is true you are deserving. It is true that you are enough, more than enough. Those views are not true. But to be able to tell the client those views are not true, we need to get to where it comes from, right? Where the narratives comes from, who is speaking in that situation, because often it's the sub-self who is speaking. So this exercise also teaches you to speak to the sub-self, to not to ignore it, to not to suppress it. You can speak to them. Dr. Schwarz says things like that, and when I practice this on myself and I talk to my own inner child, okay, right now I have to work with this. I will come back to you. And I have to make sure I go back to it. I journal about, I breathe about, I walk about, I yoga about, you name it, right? But somehow you channel that energy when you are actually thinking about this narrative and sub-characteristic. So think about the situation if you can. What is the view that hold about the other? Write it down and ask, is this view true? What is the view that I hold about myself? Write it down and ask, is this view true? And what is the view of the relationship? Write it down and ask, is this view true? And what would be your request towards the other and me? Listen more and voice more thoughts, for example. So I leave this for a while if you want to write them down. And again, it's something you can build in your practice session if you haven't already. Is it me? I know the time.
Yes, it's 10 to 7, so 6:51.
Yeah, thank you. Right, so then let's move on. Now, interpersonal neurobiology, Dr. Seeger, right, so it's just some, again, exercise what you could do. So what I'm going to teach now, I'm going to teach you a new exercise when we are not suppressing these narratives and sub-selves and sub-characteristics, right? So if you could hold one of your hands, this is my left hand here, and then you hold it like that, and then with your right hand or with the other hand, right? It depends on which hand you are, right? I am right-handed. So hold the left one, and then with your other hand, this is how you hold your fingers, right? And then you are doing this side of your hand. So hopefully you can see it, right? So these are the fingers, and then this is what it's called tapping. What we are doing now, we are recreating the narrative. We're going to acknowledge the narrative, right? We're not going to suppress it. We're not going to dismiss it. We are actually going to deal with it. Okay, I acknowledge right now, let's say I am fearful. I acknowledge I can't breathe properly. I acknowledge that I am self-sabotaging, that I am doubting myself, right? And then you keep tapping that in. Because what, again, it does, is because now you are not paying the focus, right? That attention, right, in the beginning of the session, PowerPoint, and then I showed where attention goes. The attention now does not go to the sub-narrative or the sub-self. The attention now is going to this activity right now. We are acknowledging what we are doing, right? So once you acknowledge that, then you are now switch. And then now you're using the other hand, and then you're holding a hand again, and then you are tapping on the side. And now you are tapping it in. And then I choose to love myself. I choose to take action. I choose to care about whatever the situation is, about myself. Or I choose to not to ignore the other. And then you can keep saying what you're going to choose, again, based on the relational situation, right? What you want to correct. So one is acknowledge, and the other one is choose. I am making choices. And you are tapping. Now there's a full body tapping, obviously, to create good energy and reducing cortisol and obviously increasing and releasing oxytocin and serotonin and all those good happy hormones like endorphin. And then at the end, you can then ask, and what action are you going to take? What is the action you're going to take? Now we acknowledged it. We are now made choices. And what action you're going to take? Because now it requires an action. It cannot be just, we just did this for a good energy sake. It has to be now you taking an action. And it doesn't matter how small it is, but it's an action, and it's now changing the narrative, because I am not suppressing that narrative. I am not running away from it. I am not denying it. I am not pushing it down. I am not ignoring it. I acknowledge something about it, and I made choices, and now I'm going to take an action. So hopefully it makes sense. If you got questions, please write it in a chat, and then when we get to it, then you will read it out, please. Yeah. Right. So because of time, I'm moving on quickly. Now, tapping exercise I shared, breath work I shared. And you might have heard, obviously, the power of healing music. I would definitely recommend that. And then I recommend the individuals who I work with because they do work. They sync with your nervous system. because we do have waves. We are made up of waves. We don't think about ourselves as waves, but we are energetic beings. We tend to think about ourselves as entities, as a thing. We are not a thing. No human body is just a thing. It's not a thing. We have energy field. The energy field goes over on your skin, because the mind is the in-betweenness, is not stored in our skin, right? Like, for example, you hear the car, that's how far your energy field extends. You see something on the sky, again, just think about that, how powerful is that? That's how far your energy field extends. The space, what you share with your client, right? There is an energy field in between you. That's where the mind is. Because as there are reminders, the client remembers things, right? In your space, in your Zoom session meeting, right? There will be reminders. For example, on my wall here, there are reminders, right? A client shares something with me, there will be reminders there for me, which I also need to look at and reflect on, right? If it touches me, because that's something to do with me. And that's how we share this interconnectedness, if you like, what Dr. Siegel talks about in his book, Interconnected. And that's what it is about. We are doing the work together, but obviously the client is doing in a client's own time, and then I am doing it in my own time as a practitioner. Right, so because of time, I'm just moving on. This is quite an important practice here. Mindfulness, right, is actually helps us to grow neuron cells and helps integration. Because again of the discovery and obviously invention of brain scans and body scans, then now we know more about where the neuron cells are actually live, if you like. The neuroscience used to think is only in the brain, but now we know actually there are neurocells in the heart, there are neurocells in the intestines, and they are sending information. They are in connection. So information energy flow, right? It does not just happen in the brain, it happens throughout the body, in the whole body. And again, because of the mind is actually outside of your body, then that's where it happens too. So energy field here is very important to acknowledge. So the hub represents the knowing. So when I'm communicating right now, right, I'm talking from the known, right? But consciousness is the knowing. That's where we have the plane of possibility, as neuroscience expresses that. And that's where if the channel is open, if you like, because we are connected, we are integrated, we are regulated, then we can talk from awareness, right? We can be more adaptable. We can be more flexible. And then it talks about spoke represents attention, streaming, energy, information flow, that in this focal attention happening with awareness. And again, knowing NLP, that's what we want for anyone, really, to talk from awareness, to be aware of what is happening internally, inwardly, right? So if you want to write this down, then please do, but otherwise, I move on. I think it's also, if you type this in Google, I think you will find this on Dr. Siegel's website, the Wheel of Awareness, which is very, very useful. Because obviously he's US based, is in a USA, especially in school settings, for example, is a bit more embedded. Not in the UK, not yet. Or I don't know, obviously other countries, but it is. So just bear in mind, mindfulness actually can help your brain to stay integrated. And again, not just for the present, but for later on in your life. Because cortisol is responsible for memory loss. We know that now. So if just to think about that, right, that's not good to know. If we are running on cortisol because the brain goes through directional changes, that's really not good for us. Then we really need to learn to integrative and regulative exercises so we can make sure the brain stays healthy. Much later time, right? Okay, so let's move on. The plane of possibility, as I talked about, it cannot be destroyed. which is a really good news. So no matter, again, intensity of the trauma, no matter how deep it is, how intensified it is, it cannot be destroyed. And again, in my practice, I can see it. It cannot be destroyed, no matter what assault, what abuse happened. Yes, obviously there are stages, but it's good news. It cannot be destroyed. It's the knowing, the greater self, the true self personality knows. Again, the vision, and the vision is part of the healing process. And for that, you might want to introduce it to yourself and to your client, the vision board. Now, when anyone makes a vision board, then tap into the first 5 senses. There are more than first 5 senses. There are 21 actually, but that's too complicated, right? So first 5 senses, what I am seeing in the future, right? What I am hearing, what I am tasting, what I am smelling, and what I'm touching. And any magazine, anything, right? If the client is very talented in art, right, then they can draw it, they can paint it, but create your vision. Because the true self knows about that. The sub-self doesn't, because the sub-self, if you like, right, got stuck in that past event, and it's still, if it's triggered and prompted, it will relive it. And then raise questions like, what is it that I want to create? Why is this important? And to that answer, right, why is that important? Why is that important? And again, journaling can help. Journaling somatic experience, what shows up in the body, emotions and thoughts. They are very difficult, right, to separate them. You can't really separate the 3. But it is possible to separate them. It is possible to reflect on what happens in the body, right? It is possible to reflect on what emotions, right, show up. So if you got that, then again, because of time, then just very quickly, emotions I like to talk about. So what are emotions? A state of shifting integration. That's what it is. So the negativity is in the view of the self, not in the emotion. Anger is not negative. Sadness is not negative. Because if now I'm saying anger is negative, then nobody wants to deal with it, right? Why would I go there? It's negative. I don't want to go there, right? It's something negative. Then I expect something negative to happen to me. So I don't want to go there. So I deny it, I suppress it. But we have to go there, because when we go there, that's when we can heal it. That's when we can turn it over. That's when, as Dr. Gábor Máté talks about, the wisdom of trauma. That's when we can tap into that, because there is learning in it. And then we can unlearn, right? We can unlearn what the default mechanism learned. And then with that, we can relearn new things. And then we can start to belong to the self. So the rule of 2 minutes, when it's really difficult to go there, right? Now, obviously, 2 minutes is the ideal time. But otherwise, when you're having a discussion with a client, and then it shows up in procrastination, let's say, for hours, I am doing this. And for hours, I am not moving. I am hours on my mobile phone or whatever, right? However it shows up. But there is a pattern, and it takes more time. I am delaying things. I am postponing things. And I'm aware of it. I am doing that. Yes, it happens because emotion is there. The emotion is running. And the emotion, right, is exhausting itself. Because it's not getting the attention, because it's not being looked at. The need is not served. And there's a negative view of the self in that narrative. So start with reducing that time. So how about, right, you sit with that emotion, or, instead of 4 hours, 3 hours. or if immediately can do it, then for 2 minutes for that emotion, because it cannot take over your time, your life. But you will look at it. You will spend some time with it. But it has to be a choice, and it has to come from you, because you can do that. You can reduce that time. And while you are looking at that emotion, right, you can journal, right, you can do something proactive about it. You don't need to postpone it. You don't need to delay it, because we already identified you are procrastinating. You are denying it. You are pushing it away. You are suppressing it. But look what happens. It takes over, and for 4 hours you're doing something. But otherwise, you probably wouldn't do it. You would do it for 2 minutes. So spend some time with it, the rule of 2 minutes, right? It deserves attention, where attention goes, right? So it's quite important we're not escaping from it, like exile, as Dr. Schwarz talks about it. Because these things are identifiable, and then again, they are manageable if we introduce the right technique to them. Okay, so these were emotions. Again, sense and observation is two different things. How I feel it, and how as an observer I can, as like a third person, if you like, from the outside, outwardly, I can observe it. That is very different. Sensing and observing something, it's two different things. And again, for ourselves, we can do that. I can sense the emotion, I can sense sadness, and now I'm observing it. And this is what I observe about my own emotion, sadness. It makes me to do certain things, like I just want to sit in a chair, on a chair, or on a sofa, right? Or I want to be sad about it, and then it makes me tearful, or things like that. And then I can do this for, I don't know, I'm just making it up right now, half an hour. Then we can raise questions about whether it is necessary, because maybe it's only necessary and essential for 2 minutes. Okay, coaching question, and then after this a breakout. I thought, so do we have, what is the time? What time do we have for that?
So we're actually at 7:10. So I don't know, would we still be able to do questions alongside the breakout room?
Okay, so shall we do a breakout room, so then participants can just practice what we learned, raise questions, right, or discuss questions. But some of the questions are, who would you be without a negative view of the self? What did my oppressed part want me? Again, this is where you learn to talk to. What is it afraid would happen if you did not behave as it did? Because there is an expectation, right, from the sub-characteristic. And what does it need from me in the future? Because the need needs to be served. So some of the questions, and so can we do 10 minutes maybe? Again, as what Jeremy flagged up here as well, probably you have heard Peter Levine. I have come to a conclusion that human beings are born with an innate capacity to triumph over trauma. In so doing, we will significantly increase our ability to achieve both our individual and collective dreams. So I wanted to put this quote in because it is so true. But we then need to learn how to empower the body, right, to actually achieve that. Now, my business is part of B1G1 International Business and Community, and it was 125 participants. So I am going to donate 125 days to give clean water via boreholes through B1G1. So thank you very much, because I think good energy needs to be shared with others. And that's what I wanted to share. And thank you for sharing the space with me.